I've always considered myself a seasoned traveller. Years of crisscrossing Canada's vast landscapes had given me a sense of confidence, perhaps even invincibility. But on that cold October night, as I navigated the desolate stretches of Highway 11 in northern Ontario, I felt a growing unease. The plan was simple. Leave Toronto in the early afternoon, reach Thunder Bay by midnight, and surprise my sister for her birthday the next day. But fate had other ideas. A series of unforeseen road closures diverted me onto an unfamiliar path, and soon I found myself enveloped by endless forests, with only the narrow beam of my headlights piercing the darkness. The radio lost signal hours ago, leaving me alone with the hum of the engine and my wandering thoughts. The towering pines on either side of the road seemed to close in, their branches forming grotesque shapes against the moonless sky. I glanced at the clock, 2:47 a.m. Fatigue tugged at my eyelids, but the nearest town was still miles away. As I rounded a bend, the car's engine sputtered. "No, not now," I muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. The dashboard lights flickered before the engine gave out entirely. I coasted to a stop on the gravel shoulder, the sudden silence amplifying the pounding of my heart. I tried the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. I popped the hood and stepped out into the frigid air. The chill bit through my jacket as I fumbled with a flashlight. Peering into the engine, I realized I was out of my depth. Mechanically inclined, I was not. A soft rustling came from the woods behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam darting between the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I'd intended. No response. I shook it off as an animal, a raccoon, or maybe a deer. Returning to the car, I decided to call for assistance, but of course there was no cell reception out here. "Perfect," I sighed, leaning against the car door. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure on the side of the road, just at the edge of the tree line. Squinting, I made out the silhouette of a child. What was a kid doing out here at this hour? "Hey there," I called out. "Are you okay?" The child stepped forward into the dim glow of the headlights. It was a boy, maybe 10 years old, dressed in outdated clothing, a threadbare sweater and worn pants. His hair was tousled, and his skin looked unnaturally pale. "Can you help us?" he asked softly. "Us?" I echoed, scanning the area. More figures emerged from the shadows, 3 of them, all children, varying in age, but sharing the same pallid complexion and old-fashioned attire. A girl who appeared to be the oldest stepped forward. "Our car broke down. We need a ride," she said, her tone flat. Something about them set me on edge. Maybe it was their sudden appearance or the oddness of their clothes, but they were just kids. I pushed aside my discomfort. "I'm having some car trouble myself," I explained, "but you're welcome to wait with me until help arrives." "Are your parents around?" They exchanged glances. "We need to get home," the girl insisted. "Sure, I get that. Do you know where the nearest town is? Maybe we can walk together." She shook her head slowly. "We can't walk. Let us in your car." An uneasy feeling crept over me. I'm not sure that's a good idea. It's not safe out here, and I don't have any heat without the engine running. The boy stepped closer. "Please, we're cold." I noticed then that despite the biting cold, none of them seemed to shiver or show any discomfort. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Look, I can give you some blankets from the trunk, but I think it's best we stay outside until help comes." Their expressions remained blank. "Let us in," the girl repeated, her voice firmer. I took a step back. "What's your name?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She tilted her head slightly. "Let us in," she said again. That's when I saw it. Their eyes. They were completely black. No whites, no irises, just deep, endless pools of darkness. I felt a surge of fear. This wasn't normal. I think you should go now, I stammered. Not until you let us in, the boy said, his voice losing any pretense of innocence. I backed away toward the driver's side door. I'm sorry, I can't help you. They advanced in unison. Panic took over. I yanked the door open, jumped inside, and locked it. My hands trembled as I fumbled for the keys, forgetting momentarily that the engine was dead. Let us in, they shouted, their voices echoing strangely, as if coming from all directions. I pressed the horn, hoping the noise might scare them off or attract someone. The sound blared into the night, but the children didn't flinch. Instead, they began tapping on the windows, first lightly, then with increasing intensity. Desperate, I turned the key in the ignition one more time. To my astonishment, the engine roared to life. Wasting no time, I slammed the car into gear and hit the accelerator. The car lurched forward, and the children's faces faded into the rearview mirror. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Up ahead, the road was shrouded in a thick fog that hadn't been there moments before. I slowed down, squinting to see through the dense mist. A figure appeared in the middle of the road. I swerved just in time to avoid hitting another child. My heart pounded as I realized it was the same boy from before. Impossible, I whispered. I pressed on, hoping to outrun whatever this was. The fog seemed to thicken, swallowing the road, the trees, everything. My headlights barely penetrated the gloom. Then the car radio crackled to life, emitting a garbled static that resolved into whispers. Let us in! Let us in! I slammed the radio off, but the whispers continued, now coming from the back seat. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw them, 3 shadowy figures sitting silently. I screamed, the sound raw in my throat. The car swerved wildly. Regaining control, I shouted, "What do you want?" The girl's voice whispered in my ear, though she hadn't moved. "We want you." My mind raced. Was I dreaming? Hallucinating? This couldn't be real. "Why me?" I managed to ask. "Because you can see us," the boy replied. "Most people don't." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Leave me alone." The whispers grew louder, overlapping into an incomprehensible cacophony. The fog outside churned, and shapes moved within it, dozens of them, all children with those haunting black eyes. Desperate, I remembered a story my grandmother once told me about spirits and how they required permission to enter one's home or life. "You can't hurt me unless I invite you," I said, forcing conviction into my voice. Silence fell. The figures in the back seat regarded me with inscrutable expressions. "Let us in," they said once more, but this time there was a hint of urgency, almost pleading. "No," I declared firmly. "You are not welcome here." The fog began to lift, and the whispers faded. The figures in the back seat dissolved like smoke, leaving behind only the empty darkness. I drove on, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, afraid to look back. Minutes later, I saw lights, bright, welcoming lights of a gas station. I pulled in and parked haphazardly. Stumbling out of the car, I rushed inside. An elderly man behind the counter looked up, startled. "Whoa there, son. You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," I replied shakily. He eyed me carefully. "Sit down. I'll get you some water." I collapsed onto a chair, my body trembling. He returned with a glass, which I gratefully accepted. "You're not the first to come through here looking like that," he said knowingly. "What do you mean?" I asked between sips. He leaned on the counter. "There's tales around these parts. Stories of black-eyed children appearing to travelers on this road. Some say they're spirits of lost souls. Others think they're something else. They tried to get in my car," I confessed. "Did you let them?" he asked sharply. "No," he nodded solemnly. "Good, as long as you don't invite them in. They can't harm you. I rubbed my temples, trying to process everything. Why do they do this? He shrugged. Who knows? Maybe they're trapped between worlds seeking a way back, or maybe they feed off fear. I sat there for a while, letting his words sink in. Eventually, I thanked him and decided to continue my journey. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I finally reached my sister's house in Thunder Bay, the morning sun was just peeking over the horizon. She was surprised, but thrilled to see me. I didn't mention the night's events, not wanting to burden her birthday with my nightmares. That evening, as we sat around the fireplace, I casually brought up local legends. My sister's husband, a native of the area, shared various stories, but when I mentioned the black-eyed children, his expression turned serious. "Where did you hear about them?" he asked. "I just came across it online," I lied. He hesitated before saying, "It's an old legend. They say if you encounter them, it's a bad omen. Some believe they foretell disaster." A chill ran down my spine. "Disaster?" He nodded. "People who've seen them sometimes experience misfortune afterward." I tried to shake off the dread. "Well, it's just a story, right?" "Of course," he said, forcing a smile. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. Around 3 a.m., I heard faint footsteps in the hallway. Gathering my courage, I opened the bedroom door. No one was there. I returned to bed, telling myself it was just my imagination. As I drifted off, a whisper brushed against my ear. "Let us in." I sat bolt upright, heart hammering. The room was empty, but I knew then that they had found me again. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant anxiety. Minor accidents plagued me. A missed step here, a near-car collision there. I became paranoid, seeing those black eyes in every stranger's gaze. Desperate, I sought out a local elder reputed to have knowledge of such things. She listened quietly as I recounted my experiences. "You've attracted their attention," she said. "They are persistent, but can be banished." "How?" I asked eagerly. "Strengthen your spirit. Do not give in to fear. Surround yourself with light and positivity. Acknowledge them, but do not invite them in." I took her advice to heart. Over time, the incidents decreased. The shadows receded, and I began to feel like myself again. But even now, years later, I avoid lonely roads and never drive at night. Because sometimes, in the quiet moments just before sleep claims me, I still hear them. "Let us in." And I remind myself to stay strong, for the allure of the unknown is powerful, but the will to live is stronger.